The flames licked hungrily at Varian's skin, consuming him with agonizing slowness. His screams echoed through the silent courtyard of the Academy of Arcane Order, but no one moved to stop the execution. The gathered students, his tormentors, stood in a half-circle, their faces illuminated by the flickering glow of the inferno. Some watched with cruel amusement, others with quiet indifference. The Archmage, cloaked in gold and crimson, merely observed from his high balcony, his expression unreadable. Varian had never belonged here. Born without magic in a world where sorcery dictated one's worth, he had been nothing more than an anomaly, a stain on the Academy's legacy. When he dared to defy them, when he refused to bow, they decided to erase him. His vision blurred as the fire seared through muscle and bone. The pain was unbearable, yet something deeper gnawed at him, a betrayal not just by those who wielded power, but by fate itself. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the sky above Noctis, forever shrouded in an unbroken layer of mist. It had been 1,000 years since the sun last touched the city. And now, it never would for him. But death was not the end. Somewhere beneath the city, in the forgotten ruins where no living soul ventured, the ashes of Varian stirred. A cold wind rushed through the abandoned tunnels, whispering names lost to time. And then, the impossible happened. Varian's eyes snapped open. His body was no longer his own. His skin, once fragile, was now marked with runes pulsing with dark energy. The pain was gone, replaced by something else. Something far worse. He had returned. And Noctis would tremble. Varian lay motionless in the ruins beneath Noctis, his breath shallow and uncertain. The world around him was a cavern of crumbling stone, bathed in an eerie, silver glow. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and ancient whispers drifted through the tunnels, speaking in tongues he did not recognize. He should not be alive. Slowly, he sat up. His hands, once pale and fragile, were now darkened by soot and something else, something unnatural. His skin was marked with twisting runes, pulsing with a dim, otherworldly light. He clenched his fists, and a shadow rippled through his fingers like living smoke. A memory flashed before his eyes, the flames, the pain, the laughter of those who had cast him into the fire. The weight of it all should have crushed him. And yet, he felt nothing. He reached for his chest, expecting the raw agony of burns, but instead found only cold flesh. No heartbeat. No warmth. A shiver ran through him, not of fear, but of realization. He was not human anymore. Then came the voices. Soft at first, like the rustling of dead leaves, then rising into a chorus of agonized whispers. They weaved around him, pressing against his skull, clawing at the edges of his mind. Revenant, they called him. You have returned, but at a cost. Varian staggered to his feet, his legs unfamiliar, his body something else entirely. Shadows coiled around him, responding to his movements like an extension of his will. He was reborn, but not alone. Somewhere above, in the city that had condemned him, the Academy still stood. His tormentors still lived, believing him nothing more than ash. A slow, bitter smile spread across his lips. They would learn the truth soon enough. Noctis had not changed. The city was still veiled in perpetual mist, its streets narrow and winding, swallowed by shadows that stretched unnaturally long. Towering spires of black stone loomed over the labyrinthine alleys, their pointed tips disappearing into the endless fog above. It was a city built on whispers, where power belonged to those who could bend magic to their will. Varian moved unseen through the streets, his form slipping between reality and shadow, unnoticed by the citizens who bustled through the market squares and candlelit corridors. He listened. He watched. And he waited. The Academy of Arcane Order stood at the heart of Noctis, an imposing fortress of obsidian and gold, its great halls filled with the privileged few, those born with magic, those who had cast him into the flames. But there was something else. A name whispered in the taverns and hidden chambers of the city. The Archmage, the man who had given the order for his death, was preparing for something. A gathering of the elite, a festival of power, where only the strongest of mages would be present. A perfect opportunity. Varian turned away from the academy, vanishing into the mist. The time for patience was short. The whispers in his mind urged him forward, their hunger growing. The first of his tormentors would fall before the festival began. Varian's first target was Darien Vale, the prodigal son of a noble family, heir to immense magical power, and one of the students who had cast him into the pyre. Darien had always been cruel, delighting in the suffering of those beneath him. It was his spell that had ignited the flames that consumed Varian. And for that, he would be the first to fall. The Vale estate stood near the western quarter of Noctis, an opulent mansion of marble and dark wood, guarded by enchanted sentries that patrolled its high walls. But walls meant nothing to the shadows. Varian watched from the rooftops, his form blending into the mist. He could feel Darien's presence inside, arrogant, secure, unaware of the specter that had returned for him. Closing his eyes, Varian let the power within him stir. The runes on his arms flared with cold light as the darkness obeyed his will. He stepped forward, and vanished. Inside the estate, Darien lounged in his study, swirling a goblet of wine as he flipped through a spellbook. He was alone, save for the glow of the enchanted lamps. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows along the walls. Then the flames trembled. Darien frowned, setting his goblet down. The air grew thick, and the shadows lengthened unnaturally. He turned, his eyes narrowing. "Who's there?" Silence. Then, a whisper. "You burned me alive, Darien." The voice came from nowhere and everywhere, seeping into the walls, crawling beneath his skin. Darien's breath hitched. He shot to his feet, magic sparking in his palm. "This isn't funny." The flames in the hearth died instantly. The room plunged into darkness. A shape emerged from the void, a figure wreathed in shifting shadows, eyes burning like dying embers. Varian. Darien staggered backward, his pulse hammering. "No. You're dead. You're..." Varian raised a hand, and the shadows surged forward. "So are you." The screams that followed never left the Vale estate. Darien Vale was the first, but he would not be the last. The next morning, the Vale estate was deathly silent. Servants entered Darien's study to find the room untouched, except for the blackened husk of their master, seated motionless in his chair. His mouth was frozen in a silent scream, his eyes burned out of their sockets. No fire had touched the house, no assassin had been seen. It was as if the darkness itself had claimed him. Whispers spread through Noctis like wildfire. A curse, some called it. A punishment from the spirits of the city's forgotten dead. The Academy of Arcane Order dismissed it as nonsense, but the students who had stood at Varian's execution felt the creeping dread settle in their bones. They knew. Varian walked unseen through the misted streets, the whispers in his head growing stronger. The hunger within him stirred, demanding more. They must all suffer. He had been reborn for this. The night after Darien's death, Varian stood atop the crumbling ruins beneath Noctis, gazing up at the mist-drenched city. The hunger in his veins had quieted, but only for a moment. One death was not enough. The whispers in his head had grown louder. They spoke of others, those who had stood against him, who had laughed as the flames consumed him. Their names pulsed like a rhythm in his mind, demanding justice. Demanding vengeance. His body, reforged by the forbidden power that had revived him, no longer felt entirely his own. The runes on his arms pulsed with every breath, the shadows around him shifting like living things. He had become something beyond human. A revenant. And the city would tremble before him. The Academy of Arcane Order held a council meeting the morning after Darien Vale's death. His father, Lord Vale, a high-ranking noble with ties to the Archmage, had demanded answers. Darien had been one of the brightest students at the Academy, his future secured among Noctis elite. Now, his lifeless body sat in the cold crypts of his family estate, and no spell could explain how he had died. This was not illness, Lord Vale growled, his voice shaking with fury. This was not an accident. Someone, something, killed my son. The archmage, a tall figure draped in crimson robes, merely steepled his fingers. His silver eyes glowed faintly beneath his hood. "And you suspect?" Vale clenched his fists. "There are rumors. Whispers that it is a curse. That the spirits of the Forsaken have begun to rise." The mention of spirits sent an uncomfortable ripple through the gathered mages. In Noctis, magic was everything, but some forms of sorcery, forbidden magic, were spoken of only in hushed tones. The dead were not meant to return. A younger mage hesitated before speaking. "We all saw him burn. This is impossible." The archmage finally stirred. "Impossible? Or inevitable?" Silence. For the first time in decades, fear crept into the halls of the academy. Far beneath them, in the ruined depths of the city, Varian listened. The whispers of the shadows carried everything to him, every tremor of fear, every name spoken. They would soon realize that no spell, no fortress, no power would save them. And he would make sure of it. Varian moved through the mist-drenched streets of Noctis, unseen and unnoticed. The runes carved into his flesh pulsed with cold fire, feeding on the city's fear. The whispers in his mind grew more distinct, each voice guiding him toward his next target. Elias Thorne. A prodigy of elemental magic, Elias had been one of the most ruthless students at the academy. He had not only watched as Varian burned, he had ensured it. It was Elias who had cast the binding spell that kept Varian paralyzed in the flames, who had laughed as the fire consumed his flesh. Tonight, that laughter would turn to screams. Elias lived in the upper quarter, his family estate perched on the cliffs overlooking the Vale River. The mansion was surrounded by intricate wards, shimmering barriers of protective magic designed to keep out intruders. But Varian was no intruder. He was something else. He stepped forward, and the shadows swallowed him whole. Inside his lavish bedroom, Elias slept soundly, unaware of the figure materializing from the darkness at the foot of his bed. Varian stood there for a long moment, watching, waiting. The hunger inside him stirred, and the whispers guided his hand. A single breath of cold air brushed against Elias' cheek. His eyes fluttered open. And he saw him. Varian. The boy he had burned alive. Elias barely had time to scream before the shadows consumed him, his own fire magic sputtering uselessly in the presence of the abyss. By morning, the Thorne estate would wake to find nothing left of Elias except a charred, blackened outline where his body had been. Varian walked away, the hunger inside him growing. The city was beginning to understand. The academy had already begun to react. Whispers of 2 deaths, both young mages of remarkable skill, spread quickly among the students. Rumors floated in the air like smoke, and a chill settled in the city. Fear, raw and suffocating, rippled through the streets of Noctis. The noble families, the rich, the powerful, everyone had started to look over their shoulders. But even in the midst of growing unease, the archmage remained confident. His golden eyes, unreadable beneath the cowl of his robes, studied the intricate magical defenses protecting the academy. He had seen things in the forbidden archives, dark knowledge that had been buried for a reason. What had been believed to be impossible was now a reality. The dead were rising. But why? Varian had been a non-magical boy, a thing unworthy of notice. Yet now, he was something much more dangerous. In the shadows beneath Noctis, Varian's power had grown exponentially. The whispers inside him were no longer just memories, they were voices of the lost souls who had suffered at the hands of the academy, the hands of those who wielded magic for cruelty's sake. Each whisper fueled his strength, feeding the rage that bubbled beneath his skin. The forbidden power that coursed through him was ancient, and it was bound by vengeance. He sat in the remnants of an old, abandoned chapel beneath the city, his thoughts as dark and stormy as the fog that blanketed the streets above. The air around him shimmered with magic, and his eyes glowed faintly in the gloom. His body, though not entirely his own, felt powerful. Alive in a way he had never known before. But it came at a cost. His reflection in the shattered mirror across from him was not the same boy who had once dreamed of peace. The boy who had once walked the streets without fear. Now, his face was hard, eyes like molten embers, a creature of shadows and rage. The hunger within him gnawed incessantly, and every moment spent without retribution was another moment of torment. The Archmage. That was who he would go after next. The one who had orchestrated it all. The one who had sentenced him to death. But there were others. There were still many to pay. He would make sure they understood the price of their cruelty. The Archmage had long been a figure of legend in Noctis. To most, he was a godlike being, an ancient wizard of immense power, wielding authority over the Academy and the city alike. But few knew the truth of his origins. Few knew the darkness he had sacrificed to rise to his position. He was the architect of Noctis magic. He had shaped its laws and traditions. He had built the Academy, crafting a system where only the gifted mattered and the weak were discarded. Varian had been a casualty of that system, a nameless boy burned alive because he had not been born with the gift of magic. But now, Varian was no longer nameless. He was a force, a shadow that had taken on the form of vengeance itself. The Archmage's golden eyes flickered with the hint of something he had never truly feared, a reckoning. From his chambers in the highest tower of the Academy, he watched the city beneath him. Noctis, his creation, was teetering on the brink of collapse. The shadows were stirring, the whispers louder with every passing day. I should have never allowed this to happen, the Archmage muttered under his breath. I should have buried the truth, buried the darkness. But it is coming back, and it will consume everything. The room seemed to darken as he spoke, and for a moment, the Archmage wondered if he had summoned something far greater than he could control. Varian was not merely a boy returned from the dead, he was a force that threatened to unravel everything. And the Archmage could feel it in his bones. Varian was coming. The city of Noctis had begun to buckle under the weight of fear. Students no longer walked the streets with pride, they moved in hushed groups, casting wary glances into the shadows. The whispers had turned to rumors, the rumors to terror. No one was safe. Even those with the mightiest of magic could not escape the unseen force that lurked just beyond their reach. Varian moved through the city as a wraith, unseen, unheard, except for the soft echo of his footsteps in the dead of night. His power had grown too large for him to contain, but he had learned to temper it, weaving through the dark corners of Noctis, feeding off its sorrow and fear. He was a revenant, a spirit of vengeance, and the city was his to haunt. His next target was Alastair Morrow, a senior member of the Academy, a brilliant mind, and the one who had endorsed Varian's execution. Alastair had always believed that magic was a divine right, something to be hoarded by the worthy. Those without magic were weak, unfit to walk among the elite. Varian's existence had been an insult to him, and he had done everything in his power to ensure that Varian was erased. Now, it was time for retribution. Alastair's mansion stood on the east side of the city, perched high above the Vale River. His estate was heavily guarded, but Varian had long since learned how to slip past such obstacles. Magic that had once been a curse to him was now his greatest weapon. He watched the mansion from a distance, hidden beneath a veil of shadows. Inside, Alastair sat in his study, a glass of wine in his hand, flipping through old tomes, his mind lost in arcane secrets. The walls around him were lined with ancient artifacts, relics of a bygone age. Yet none of them could protect him. Varian closed his eyes, letting the shadows consume him. He appeared before Alastair without warning. The mage looked up, his eyes widening in disbelief. No, it can't be, you're dead. Varian's lips curled into a grim smile. I was. But you forgot the one thing you never should have. Alastair reached for his wand, his fingers trembling, but Varian was already there, faster than the spell he had prepared, faster than the fear that began to choke Alastair's breath. The shadows coiled around him, suffocating him, binding him to the floor. I warned you, Varian whispered. Magic is a curse, Alastair. A gift you will soon regret giving me. In the darkness, Alastair screamed, but it was swallowed by the shadows that had come for him. The night air in Noctis had a weight to it. A coldness that was not just the chill of the fog. It felt as though something ancient, something buried deep beneath the city's foundations, was waking. Varian could feel it, a pulse that resonated in the depths of his being. The shadows whispered not only of vengeance but of something older. Something tied to the forbidden magic that had brought him back from death. As he stood over Alistair's crumpled form, the shadow still lingering in the air, something stirred. A whisper that was not his own. "You seek revenge, Revenant. But there are darker truths you have yet to uncover." Varian's head snapped up, his senses sharp. The shadows around him thickened, swirling like tendrils, as if reacting to the voice that had spoken. His blood ran cold. The voice was ancient, not a whisper of a soul he had known. It was a voice that carried the weight of centuries, the breath of the void. It felt like a call, a summons from a place deep within the earth, from somewhere far beneath Noctis. What is this?" Varian muttered, his eyes narrowing. The runes on his arms flared with a sudden heat, responding to the foreign presence in his mind. The shadows around him pulsed like a living entity, rippling in response to the unseen force. The voice came again, its tone smooth and laden with the knowledge of ages. "You are not the first to seek vengeance, Revenant. The magic that has given you life is older than your torment. It was sealed once, long ago, by those who knew its true cost. They feared what it could become. You must find the seal before it finds you." Varian's heart raced. The seal. He had heard of no such thing. There had been no mention of it in the archives or the forbidden texts he had studied. But this voice, the presence, it knew something he did not. Something that could change everything.